Bonsoir à tous. La première table ronde va commencer. Welcome to you. You're the four person from the teams that are presenting their work here tonight at the Fondation Cartier. So we will have this conversation, the four of us, around the subject of game design, which is a very wide subject. So I will make a quick introduction of maybe 5 minutes about this event, and then we will go on with introducing every one of you and have this conversation. So the name of this program is D'autres mondes in French. It means other worlds, and it's a name that we choose because it has many meanings. Of course, there is the reference to a very famous game, Another World, by Eric Chahi. And I think that this reference is not by mistake, because it was a game made in 1991 by a single person with a real whole vision, an artistic vision, and very far from the idea that video games are only for entertainment. This game happened to be bought by the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, in 2012, amongst other. It was done thanks to a curator called Paola Antonelli. And this is interesting because I think that for the contemporary art world, video game, even if things are changing, is some sort of another world also, a world to discover. And our presence here is showing that things are changing, but still it's something new. So perhaps one of the reasons I think it's rather new is the fact that video games are objects that are designed. So that leads us to the topic, is how can you show, or how can you, in a museum or in a foundation, an object that is designed. In a way, I think that you cannot just look at it or listen to it. You have to make the experience of the thing in itself. And this is why, in a very wide sense, the word design stands for. For example, you would design a chair, you would design a building. And it's interesting, I think, Mélusine, you come from an architecture background also. And I think as video game makers, like architects, because they have to acknowledge the fact that people will have to enter their game and live into their game. So perhaps this is the first definition I would propose to discuss, is about game design, is about this metaphor of allowing the player inside your game, which makes it different maybe from other forms. So I will move now to introduce you. So we have TOMAVATARS, which is French. He's from the project yvain, which is a project with the artist Eric Giraudet, Debout de Mange, Eric Giraudet de Mange, which is who is not here tonight, unfortunately, he's in Japan. And you also work in the concrete game team. You have the T-shirt, which has recently done a promotional game for the Stunfest, which is to be mentioned because it's one of very important event for video games in France, and it's next week, I think. So it will be interesting to see how a developer works with an artist to make sure that his vision is designed into a game. Then we have Mélusine Wagner. She's part of a 6-person team around the project Architect VR that you can experience here. Actually, the whole team is here tonight, and you will be the representative of them. Then we have DUŠAN ČEŽEK, which is from Czech Republic, and is from the Ministry of Broadcast team that is doing Ministry of Broadcast, their first game. I think you were trained as a graphic designer first. Okay, if I'm not mistaken. And you are the creative director of this project. Ministry of Broadcast is a game that is set in a Eastern-style totalitarian regime, and it's a 2D platformer. And finally, we have Arvi Teikari, Arvi Teikari, also known as Empoli, I think. Is it all right? Yeah. So you have started working in the independent video game scene for a very long time, I think, and you released many free games. Now you are part of Nola Games, which is a team that is developing a very innovative game, which is Noita. But recently you are made a project that was very weighted in the community, Baba Is You. This is the game that you can try here, and that has earned a lot of praise, both from critics and from the public. And that is a puzzle game where you can push blocks in order to get out of a room, but those blocks also are the rules themselves, so you can, in a way, redesign. So that is why maybe I would like to start with you, Arvi, because Baba Is You is a very interesting game in the way that it is designed so that the player can redesign it in a way. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Is this?
Yeah, I think it's working.
Okay, fine, great, thank you, sorry. I think it's kind of interesting to see people play the game, because the experience is very different for different people, because the game allows, especially early on, a lot of freedom for the player, because they can change the rules of the game, and many of the puzzles can be changed in different ways to solve it. At the same time, it's a game that is, as you mentioned, it's sometimes difficult to exhibit, because as a puzzle game, it requires a lot of thought. A lot of the process of playing it happens in the mind of the player, and as such, it cannot be. It's harder to follow it if you watch someone else play. But when you play it yourself, you can have the experience of kind of solving the puzzles. Puzzles at the same time in your mind while you also move around in the game world.
So, how did you come to design something like that? Because it's very, I don't know how to explain it, you have to try it, but it's really a game about game design, and I guess you have a lot of experience, and it didn't came like that on your first trial.
It was, the process was very, very random, I would say. I was at an event, one of these game jams where people make games at a short period of time, and the idea is to more like prototype a new idea and then maybe move on. And the theme of the game jam gave me this idea of, what if I could have a block of ice that sits in a pool of lava, and it should melt, but then we have the statement, ice is not melt, and that makes the ice not melt in lava. I can't remember anymore, it's been 2 years, the exact details of what happened, but I got this mental image, and I went from there. So I think I didn't approach the game from the viewpoint of, I want to make a game about game design, but more that I want to make a game where you can make a block of ice not melt in lava, and then the rest kind of came from that.
Okay, what are your thoughts on that, DUŠAN? Because you are not really a programmer, you're more trained in aesthetics, probably, in putting all kind of typography, pixel art, putting all kind of things together to make something coherent. And how do you...
Yeah, because we're a 4-people team, and we started together. So we're all working kind of together in the puzzle design and level design. But then we have separation between development and graphics, of course, and we're in charge for graphics on our side. And I mean, when we were thinking about the mechanics, we started with, we wanted to create a game that we would love to play. That's how it started. I mean, the whole thinking process. And then it evolved and evolved more, because there is a story that we want to tell. You know, it's kind of combination of storytelling and kind of a little bit of cinematic experience and level design and puzzle design. So this fusion of, you know, artists and developers working together to create a game made Ministry of Broadcast what it is today, basically.
Which is interesting because you said you made something you would like to play, so you didn't put the user first, the user experience. So when did it came this idea of, because when you play Ministry of Broadcast, it's a rather rigid gameplay. It's old school gameplay where you have to jump exactly at the right time, etc. And I had the feeling that it has something to do also with the aesthetics of the Eastern avant-garde and constructivism, etc.
Yeah, when we start talking, I mean, let's start with moving first.
Okay.
So, yeah, we were influenced by Prince of Persia and Flashback and all the games that we played as kids. But in this case, we wanted to use this type of movement because the story is based around this reality show that, you know, this oppressive regime gives you the opportunity to escape through. So we used it to demonstrate, and it's going to be more visible with the full gameplay. Like you said, puzzle games are really hard to present on events. So while you're home alone and reading the story and going through it, we wanted to feel player detached a little bit from the player. That it's not that you know, it's like you're controlling a person rather than some, you know, few pixels. So he has his own mind, he has his own small decisions, but Big Brother is like forcing him to, you know, like do certain things and jump into that. And he's having these small self-conscious thoughts that he doesn't want to jump and he doesn't want to kill himself. But, you know, if he's pushed by command, he needs to do it, he needs to obey. So we wanted to create this detachment from it, and this style of movement from Prince of Persia fitted perfectly to it, because it's not pixel perfect. It's like you have this kind of glide, and, you know, he needs time to stop, because if you command him to stop, he's not going to stop instantly. He's just going to, you know, try to do it, but not succeed. And what was the second question about the aesthetics of it? Or
yeah, no, I was wondering if design is not a place where the story, the graphics, the rules of the game, if it's not the place where everything meets, the meeting point of these different elements, and how do you deal with that?
We basically wanted to combine as much things together as possible. I don't know how we succeeded or not, but for example, design of design started with, we wanted to combine something really beautiful with something really, really ugly. So inspired by Berlin Wall and, you know, closeness to, because we're from Prague and it's like 3 hours to Berlin. So we wanted to create this, you know, gray and Nazi architecture and symbols, but turn it into something beautiful, which is like, we use the color palettes from the Swiss Alps, you know, skiing and stuff, like postcards. So we wanted to create like regime which is part of today's world. You know, if advertising agency would come and say, okay, you need to reposition yourself, you need to make a new strategy. So we changed the threatening red colors with baby blue ones, because on the focus groups it showed that people love baby blue. You know, so basically all the flags and all the materials they're having there are based on some rebranding, and they're trying to be this pleasant system that lets you escape. You know, and it's doing the backdoor basically operation. So all the art and development in that particular moment, you know, combined together to create this kind of, let's say, another world, but, you know, like to make everything that it's, you know, naturally fitting to the world that our character is.
Something I noticed about platformers is that often there are games where you need to escape. It's a thematic, or you need to get out of the room by changing the rules. And this leads me to Mélusine, because also Architect VR is a game where you can take some elements of the architecture of the building and you can combine it in order to change the shape of the building. And there is a creature that has to escape. So how come this idea of combining our building and escaping at the same time?
At first, is it working? Okay.
Yeah, you have to.
At first, the inspiration was a movie by Sofia Coppola, and another one which is Mustang. So the movie by Sofia Coppola was Suicide Virgin. Suicide Virgin? No, Virgin
Yeah.
Suicide. And which is a movie in which there is some girls who are stuck in the house and they can't escape, and it leads you to reconsider the space where they are stuck. And so we started at this point, and when you reconsider the space, actually, we thought that it's a bit like when you are a child and you look at your space, the same way you look at a dollhouse. And in the dollhouse, you can move the furniture or etc. And then you create a path, or at least you create your own space, and that way you reconsider the way you look at things around you and your private space. So this was the idea at first.
But there is a very important design choice in your project in the fact that it's virtual reality, because you could, I guess, make the same game without these tools. So why did you choose to use it?
It's because it's part of the core mechanic of the game. The first one is observation, and the second one is manipulation, just like a kid. When you're playing with some wood, or every object you can find that allows you to construct something. So it's like a juvenile feeling.
Okay.
This is the. No, don't you think? VR is like a kid's thing. It's a kid media.
Okay, so virtual reality is for kids.
Yeah. No, it allows adults to be kids again.
Okay.
More easily than maybe some other platform.
Yeah, I can understand that. I felt that when I tried it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to end this first roundtable with TOMAVATARS. In your case, it's a bit special because you had to put the vision of an artist in the sense of contemporary art and to transform it into a game. And you were telling me before that it was not designed, which I was not sure I was agreeing with you. So why do you think that it makes it not designed?
There are no mechanics, not much mechanics, except walking, watching, clicking on dialogue box, and jumping, but for nothing, because you don't need to jump, but you can. You can zoom, but no, there are no mechanics in the game, no puzzles, nothing. It's a walking simulator. You just have to walk and observe. So I think game design is a lot concern a lot the mechanics of a game. So this is why I told you there is no game design in this game, but there is some, of course, because it's a game.
But I'm not sure I agree with you about your work, because first of all, there is something that makes you want to go through and to go to the end of the game, and also there is the level design, because where you have some kind of surprises and even like prizes, récompenses, things. So this is thought. How did it work with the Éric Giraudet? Did you had some like video games
in common?
Mastercraft? In common that you put.
Before working together, he went to see me, to meet me, because I didn't know him before, and I show him the engine, an Unreal Engine. So I show him the technologies, and then I gave him some references. He had some references, but old references like Doom or old game, and I gave him some references, and the main one was the Beginner's Guide by, I can't remember his name, but from the guy who made the Stanley Parable. Yeah. And I really love the Beginner's Guide because it's really questioning game design and game creation, and also madness. And our game is about madness.
Is about what? Sorry.
Madness.
Ah, okay.
Yes, because Yvain went crazy. And so I gave him this game, and he played and loved it. Then the design of our game was more a game between us, Eric, the artist, and me as a technician, and him as an artist, because he thought the story, the narrative. He drew me a small map for the progression, and then I had to make things. So I made a lot of things, absurd things, because I love absurd, and Eric likes absurd too. So yes, it was a game design. I don't know how to say, but it was essentially fun making things and speaking about it afterward.
Okay, thank you. I see a main point maybe in all of your answers in different ways. At least it's an hypothesis. It's the question of rules and game design as being also an art of rules and how to distort them in very different way. For Baba Is You is pretty obvious because you can rewrite the rules. I think Ministry of Broadcast also is with the idea that it's a game inside a game and that it's a totalitarian regime that is looking at you, etc. What do you think about this idea that it's as video game as being an art of rules?
I assume you were asking me.
No, I was.
Okay.
I don't know. You can also react to each other answers or.
It's about breaking rules. I mean, for us, I mean, you have a set of rules that are established through other games, and I think that really good titles like yours, for example, it's there just because it broke the system. I mean, it broke the main settings that what you expect from the rules in the games. And it gives you the power of developer to change those rules in a certain way, power of developer, and breaking those rules, it's something that really works. But it's like thin line between breaking the game and breaking the rules.
But I feel that at the same time, many games that don't directly interact with rule systems also kind of, I think I kind of agree with the idea of games being about like having rules, because in most games, just because of technical limitations, there are many rules that the games impose on a player. For example, in most, basically all 3D games almost, there are some invisible walls somewhere. You cannot move past those. Or if we go into like start like nitpicking, we can say that the idea that you move with a keyboard and you cannot like move both of your arms separately or both of your legs separately, it's kind of a rule. But as you mentioned, throughout the history of video games, those limitations have kind of become some certain like assumptions about video game design. And it's interesting when those are broken, but at the same time they are kind of like a framework for other games to follow, because players already know that, okay, I think this game goes into a certain genre, so it will probably follow these certain rule sets. And then, yeah, it could break them, but it might follow them as well.
And did you felt that by doing an art game, you were like freed from rules? That it's in this sense, maybe you said that?
No, because I had to use invisible walls, because if not, people would fail and they couldn't play anymore. And if I could make another rules to respawn them after they failed, but it would need more work for me. So no, I needed the invisible walls. We are using rules in the game because you have to go to one point. So there is physics and invisible walls, things like this. But we are showing how the game is made, and we were free because of this. We are showing everything nearly, and at the end of the game, sorry, spoiler, you are falling and you can see under the landscape, you see the objects and you see that the world is empty. And this was very interesting because I'm used to making games with rules and where you don't want the people to see how it is made because you want them to be in the game, immersion, you know. And this game was really fun to make because this wasn't here anymore, and so I can invent everything I want, you know. Like I was just playing with the engine, you see, and that's it. And this was so cool. I want to make this every time.
And maybe Mélusine, when you do a virtual reality project, it's a bit different because our real body is moving, and if, for example, we have to have those white lines on the floor so that you cannot get out of the game. So it's a bit more complicated, maybe in this case.
Yeah. While my colleagues here were talking, I was thinking that the aspect of the rules depends whether you're making a narrative game or a mechanic-based game, I think. And the VR is kind of between those two elements because you don't have the choice. You are constrained by the technology, so you obviously have to follow rules, mechanic rules, and often it leads you to make some more narrative games. So it's really between, I think, those two elements.
It's been really interesting over the years to see how VR games, because they, originally they used to have just like the VR glasses and you couldn't really move at all. Nowadays we have these where you can have a space to move around in, but it's obviously still kind of limited. I think some places have like halls you can move around in, so there's like a large area to move in. But still, it's been very interesting to see in how many different ways different games have solved the problem of the player not being able to move around that freely. Or maybe they haven't had that, and then people get like a motion sickness because their body movements do not follow the game movements. But for example, I remember an old prototype I saw where the player is controlling a hot air balloon. So the limited area they can move in is actually the whatever you even call it, like the place you are in a hot air balloon, and then you control things. And it was a
kind of basket.
Yeah, the basket, I guess. Yeah, and it was a very interesting way of solving the limitation. Obviously, they kind of changed the narrative to fit the rules in that sense, but it was still very intriguing to me.
Yeah, my best game in VR is Superhots. Have you played it? This is incredible because it's a game where you control the time by moving. If you don't move, the time goes very, very, very slowly. And so they really brilliantly use the constraint of the space of VR to make a fantastic and sensational experience. And yeah, I like the constraints of VR.
There could be some kind of a conflict between the mechanics and the narrative, or at least the narrative being linked to those rules, in the sense that you have to have some kind of, I mean, what is the strongest, the rule or the meaning of what you're trying to express?
I think generally narrative-based games, from what I've seen or seen people talk about, there is often easily a kind of a conflict where the most common game mechanics, gameplay systems support very specific things, often, for example, violent things. We have a lot of games about shooting, whereas many narrative systems work in a very different space, and fitting these together, like some games kind of try to do both at the same time, where they find some kind of a reason for the player to be, I don't know, being violent or doing jumping around in a platformer, while also having the narrative as a more separate things. But I feel that often the most impressive games are the ones where the these rules, these gameplay systems are part of the narration. For example, several years ago, there was this game, Papers, Please, released, where you work as a border control person, and people give you their passports and other documents. You go through them and find discrepancies and errors, and then, because it's a story about, again, an oppressive Eastern Bloc regime, if you find an error, no matter what the excuse, you are supposed to push them back. They cannot cross the border. And that game, in a very, very impressive way, combined this kind of find the errors gameplay, very simple gameplay system, with a very lively world and very interesting narration. And I think your game kind of goes for something similar in that the way the player moves, what you mentioned about the player kind of not being able to stop immediately, kind of does a similar thing where the rules of the gameplay are part of the story, in a sense.
So I like it that you mentioned Paper Please, where you play some sort of a patrol policeman. You have to decide whoever can enter and whoever can get out. So I was wondering, in your opinion, what is the difference between obeying rules in life, like obeying law, and playing a video game? It looks very similar, no?
Well,
You're not going to be arrested if you break some rules in the video game. No, you mentioned it earlier. You said why every game is about escape. So that's why. You know, everyone.
Free yourself from
everyone can escape for a little while. You know, from the rules from the real life.
but at the same time, in real life, if you jaywalk, you are breaking the rules, but nothing is going to happen. But in a video game, if the game has a rule about not jaywalking, you cannot do that unless you break the game in a more fundamental way. So I guess laws in video games are more rigid and more immutable than laws in real life in many situations.
And I think that laws are used to hold together a society. And in a game, the laws or the rules are created to, or at least here, to create an experience, and are here, to make you learn something, and that's not the role of the laws.
I guess also you could say that in real life, many laws are such that no one is somewhere brainstorming about like how do we make the best rules, but instead they're like born out of tradition. They could be outdated, they could be dangerous, they could be harmful, they could be outright bad, and hopefully they get changed eventually. With video games, you could have bad rules, but there is still probably a smaller amount of people over a shorter amount of time trying to figure out the best rules. So there's kind of like a qualitative difference between many laws and many game rules.
So you see that game design is also about politics. I would like maybe to keep 5 minutes to see if you have some questions. We don't have much time, but we can take 1 or 2 questions. I can give you the mic. I have no prepared question. I'm supposed to have a prepared question, but I don't. Okay, so you can go and try the games of our 4 guests that we thank them very much for their presence here. You can ask them your question in private. I am very happy that we could have this discussion. It was very fast, but I think we had some very interesting thought. And there will be another roundtable in half an hour, this time in French, cette fois-ci en français. And it will be about Swatted and Malo Drive, that are the 2 movies that you can see here. So if you want to have a look at it before we talk about it, you can. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess half an hour. Yeah.